That is what I'm probably going to end up like flying.
All right. This election unit, I think I mentioned that yesterday. This is kind of a longer chapter. There's a lot of things with elections that you really got to know, but it also, a lot of the stuff applies to, public opinion stuff comes up with election. When it comes to governing, when it says, when we start talking about the House and the Senate and even the presidency, of what you can try to get done, some of that we can relate back to the election stuff. And the AP likes to use the term linkage, and they like to, on their FRQs, link different things to one another. This one is linked more than any other one because it applies to a lot of different things. So it's not uncommon to see questions dealing with elections, even when they're talking about Congress. How would, how do elections affect how effective a political party can be when governing, in Congress? Something like that. So you're looking at you're looking at political parties, you're looking at governing, you're looking at elections, and all the things we should be able to tie together. But it is not uncommon to have, questions like that. With the assignment I shared with you, I think I shared the voters will go with whatever works, right? It doesn't really matter which order I send these two in, but I won't give them to you both at the same time. So I put the due dates up there. The 17th, which is next Tuesday, have that one read by. Not an exceptionally long reading, but it looks at, what voters do. Okay? And then the second one that I'll give you, I probably won't assign it until next week. I won't share it with you. It's called Head versus Heart. That one is from Time or Newsweek. And it's, again, looking at how do voters make their decisions. I think that's the best reading of all of them that I give you. I don't have the FRQs written yet. My plan is to get them written up over this weekend, but I will share them with you next week. I made the due date for the test and the FRQs the same day. We're going to do it on that Monday. I just don't think we'll be done by next week. I guess maybe if we feel like we will be, I have the multiple choice test written, but I don't know if we'll be ready for it yet. We'll see. Chapter 10 looks at elections, and one of the things that's kind of what we can do a little bit now is we're not all that far away from the next presidential election. I mean, that sounds like a ridiculous statement because we're well over a year and a half away. It's not until November of 2016. However, we see some of these same aspects here when running for president. If you're going to run for president, there's some things that you have to do. You can't start when the primaries begin, and the primaries are going to begin in January of next year. So obviously, you can't start campaigning the day of the very first primary or of the Iowa caucus, which would be the first thing. Your campaign has to start before that, and you could probably wait till this summer, but in all reality, the people that are going to be running next year, in a year from now when we're doing the primaries and stuff and the caucuses, they're getting their names out there now. They got to get that stuff out. Now, you don't have to be quite as quick in a congressional election because the congressional elections are not so long. But for presidential elections, you do. So there's a lot of things that we can look at when it comes to all this stuff. There's two aspects of getting elected, though. The first thing is you got to get yourself nominated. And we've looked at political parties, and we've looked at, how people vote, and we'll look at more of that again. But if you aren't one of the two major parties, you probably aren't going to win. We can say statistics are way against you. So you have to win that nomination. You have to get the Democratic nomination or the Republican nomination to win. And that's kind of a key thing. But then after you get that nomination, then you've got to run in that general election. You got to win the actual election. But I think probably the nominating stage is probably just as important as the other. Probably more important when it comes to House elections. If you can get that nomination, we can predict of the 435 districts, I bet all but 30 to 35 in any given year, we could make the prediction right now on who's going to win. we know the incumbency reelection rate is unbelievably high. We know that the way that the districts are drawn out oftentimes favor one party more than another. So if you can get that nomination, if you're in office, your chance of winning a House election are very, very, very good. But you get so sometimes the biggest races, let's say you are both Republicans and it's a Republican district for the House of Representatives, it's not who you're going to run against in the general election. It may be who's going to win the primary. Whoever wins the primary is probably going to win the election. That's not necessarily true when it comes to the presidency quite nearly as much as it is in the House. But certainly primary elections can be huge. And to gain that nomination, you need to win the primary. And all of this stuff takes individual effort. If you're going to run for office, you got to raise the money yourself. After you get the nomination, the party will give you a little bit of money. They'll help you out. But most of the money raised by candidates, most of the money used by candidates are raised by candidates. Most of it is not their own personal wealth. However, it might be during their first election. If it's the first time I've ever run, I'm going to try to get money from my supporters, but I may not have enough supporters, enough people believe in me or whatever, and it may be difficult for me to get any money from interest groups, PACs, and especially the interest groups, but super PACs too. So I might have to use some of my own wealth or take loans out to do that. It's easier the second time around. And what we notice a lot with members of Congress is it seems like they are now continually fundraising, and especially the House of Representatives, because they're up for election every 2 years. So every 2 years, the House, you have to run for another election, and you got to have money to run. So it's almost like continually raising money. That's your own individual effort, especially the first time. You have to appeal to the voters. You have to get an organization together, both at the local level and at the national level. But it's a lot of individual effort doing all that. That is different than in other places. In a lot of democracies, what you get is the parties doing a lot of that work. Right? U.S. democracy is a little bit different. Our system is a little bit different. Our parties don't have nearly as much say as they do in other types of democracies. So a lot of it is an individual effort of people, and it's, rather than the party. But then there's that individual appeal, too. Now, some of the information I'm going to give you is just some statistics that I just want to show you. And, I don't know if you have to write the numbers down, and obviously I have my PowerPoints online, but the overall thing that I think you should take from it. I couldn't get up to 2014, but this is House re-election bids, and I'll show this again here, but this is the incumbency re-election rate. Now, the word incumbency or incumbent just means somebody who is in office and who is running for office again. Okay, Kristi Noem is the incumbent. If somebody runs against Kristi Noem in the next election, that will be the challenger, but she's the incumbent. So the incumbency re-election rate in the House of Representatives and the Senate both is very, very, very high. And if you look at it, we're up in the 90s. I think it doesn't show the exact number right here, all the way over 80, but almost always the 95, 96 to 98%. Meaning that if you are elected in Congress, your chance of getting reelected is tremendous. Your chance of beating an incumbent is very, very slim in both the House and the Senate. That's not quite the same for the presidency. If you would study the history of the president, we see a lot of presidents get reelected. And let's just, if we count back, certainly President Obama served 2 terms, so he got reelected. And certainly George Bush, President Bush served 2 terms, the most recent George Bush. Okay, and Clinton served 2 terms. But George Bush before him did not. Reagan did. Ford did not. Carter did not. LBJ kind of did. He didn't run for re-election in '68. I think I skipped Nixon there. Nixon served 2 terms, kind of. I mean, he was elected twice at the very least. LBJ was elected once. I don't know if he would have won in '68 or not. Kennedy was assassinated, so we don't know him there. But if you look at, there's getting back to the '60s, more than half have won the re-election rate, but it's not anywhere near the percentage of congressional ones. And because there are no term limits in Congress, that we end up with the same people over and over and over for a long period of time. They keep winning, but obviously President Obama can do no more than just win a re-election bid. I think somewhat it's difficult to truly understand because we get so frustrated with Congress. And if you look at the approval rating of Congress, it's not good, yet we keep voting them back into office. I think some of it is the appeal that our individual Congress people have. We may feel, I like this individual. I don't like what they do as a group, but my person is good, It may be the way the districts are set up where one party has a huge advantage and that, they're just going to continually win. It may be the fact that they are closer to us. I've never talked to President Obama, but I've talked to Kristi Noem a couple times. I've talked to John Thune numerous times, and I don't know any of these people. It's not like that we're friends or I'm anybody. But in a small state, and especially in a district, you may have more personal contact with that individual. Maybe, there's a number of reasons for it, but I don't know if you can pinpoint this is the exact reason why members of Congress get reelected so much more than the president. I think we hold the president accountable for things the president can't do. Part of it is because they promise things during elections that they really can't fulfill. And the easiest example is, I'm going to lower your taxes. You vote for me and your tax will be cut. They can't do that. They have no constitutional authority whatsoever to do that. But they make promises like that all the time. And our president doesn't have a whole lot of constitutional authority. U.S. Senate re-election rates are high also. They're not as high as the House. And maybe again, it's different in South Dakota. You got to realize this, that the House of Representatives represents a district. And we haven't covered this, and I will later on, too, so just bear with it. And some of you already know this, but let's say that this is a state. Let's just say this is Minnesota. And it's divided up. They have 8 members of the House, but it's divided up not like a checkerboard, where they're divided up this way. But it's divided up by population, and that probably wasn't 8 districts. But so, it might be your district might be right here around the Twin Cities, and another one might be right here, and another one might be this whole area here, and another one might be this whole area here. It's based on population. The population of this district should be about the same as this district. So the districts are not the same size geographically, but they're relatively close proportionally. Okay, what that means is that there's about 750,000 people for each member of Congress. And now your state might have 8 million people in it. And your senator represents those 8 million people. So you may or may not have a chance to see your senator often or talk to him or whatever. You have a better opportunity to speak to your member of the House. They have a small district. They're probably going to visit this district some. They're going to be back. They're going to be from that district. It's just a smaller district. Again, South Dakota is different because we have one House district. So we almost feel that they're similar to our senators. But we also have a very small state when it comes to population. Did somebody have... this shows the two combined, House and Senate, and again, nothing is really different there. This only goes up to 2010. But you notice that the House is reelected at a much higher rate than the Senate. Though the Senate rates are going up. Notice here in the 80s, it was fairly low. Even not a whole lot higher than 50% in 1980. I don't have an explanation for that. Maybe it says in the book. Maybe it's just something I don't know. I don't necessarily know the reason, but it's up fairly close more recently. It's been higher lately. Again, just some statistics. Take them for what you will. But when it comes to running for re-election and the money spent, in 2014, the average winner spent $1.5 million. In the House, they spent $12 million. In the Senate, the average winner spent $12 million to run for re-election. I think your book says, and your book is a little dated, it's written after the 2008 election, but it's not as up-to-date as this. And I think it said something like the average money spent for a Senate victory was $10 million. It's always higher in the Senate than the House. They have 4 or 6 years to raise their money rather than 2. And a Senate position is a, I would say, a more prestigious position. It hasn't always been that way, but since we started to elect members of the Senate, if you're a senator, you're elected for 6 years rather than 2. You're one of 100, or you're one of 100, excuse me, rather than one of 435. When it comes to the Senate, you have a vote on nominations and judicial nominations and other ones, and even treaties. We don't have a whole lot of treaties, but nonetheless, the House has powers, but most of the powers are shared with the Senate. There's very little that the House does without the Senate. There's not a lot the Senate does without the House, but, approving judges is one. There are some things. So it seems more prestigious. 94% incumbent rate in the House, 83% in the Senate in 2012. Look at the average loser. The average winner spent $1.5 million, the loser $256,000. $12 million to $1.1 million. Now, I don't know if money equates victory, and I don't know if you can say it does. In presidential elections, there's no statistics that say that if you outspend your opponent, you will win the election. Because in presidential elections, they spend so much money that I think it's overkill. But a lot of the money spent has a lot to do with the image that you're trying to portray and name recognition. Well, if you're running for president, you have name recognition. I mean, it's such a big race in America that even if you didn't run a commercial, if you're one of the 2 major candidates, you're going to still have name recognition. But if you're running for the House or the Senate, you may not. They don't have as much money. We don't necessarily feel that they're as important of an election. They probably are more important because the Congress has more power than presidency. But as a people, I think we feel the president is a more important election. Just look at voter turnout rates in presidential election years versus congressional election years. So you might have to spend more money to get your name out there. You don't probably have as much money to spend. This goes back to the 2010 one. And I just, again, the numbers are going up, but it's always you're spending more. Bigger one here. Open Secrets is a great source for campaign money stuff. All that information is open to the public, but Open Secret breaks it down into stuff. So average, and I just want to show you a couple things here just because I want you to see that it's going up. Average House winner spending, this starts in 1990, this goes to 2012. This is the Senate, from 1990 to 2012. The thing is that realize it's kind of a steady increase. Here I understand it bumped a little bit, but still, it's our trend is it's more and more. And this is a pretty good site to get information on. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it today, but there's stuff there, and that's linked on your stuff. Here's probably where it's the bigger thing. Incumbent primary advantage. Between 1990 and 2008, only 10% of incumbent senators and only 5% of House members, incumbents, lost in their primaries. Sometimes it happens. You lose in your primary, but very seldom does it happen. Okay, so if I'm the elected official, if I'm John Thune, when I run for re-election, whenever Thune is up, I think he's up next year or the next election, I believe. Is that right? Or did Thune there was no Senate election this year. Anybody know? I think he's up for election we had a Senate election, excuse me, but it wasn't Thune, wasn't his Senate election. But I think it's the next election. So let's say it's 2016. I don't know for sure if it is or not. It's either 2016 or 2018. But let's say he's running in 2016. He's got to win the Republican primary in the state. So if there's another Republican that wants to challenge him for that Senate seat, they can do so, but they're going to have to win the primary to get the party's nomination. Well, chances are his party is going to keep him. And as long as his party keeps him, he's probably going to win. We know incumbents almost always win. It'd be very difficult for him to lose. So his primary might be his toughest election. I don't know if it's the toughest election, but an election he's got to win. And statistics show that they most likely will. We have two independents in the Senate right now? Who are they? We name them? Bernie Sanders is one. Lieberman's the other, correct? Joe Lieberman? Almost 100% sure I'm right. Am I correct? We're going to say I'm right. You guys don't know the difference. But I'm pretty sure I'm right. But Lieberman's a Democrat. However, he lost in the Democratic primary. So then he ran as an independent and he won his state. He's one of the few examples you can give where someone lost their primary and then, lost their primary from their party, even though he was an incumbent in office. There are examples, but there's not very many. Why do they win at such a high rate? Well, we've talked about this a little bit. Some of these reasons, and there's not, again, a reason, but, there is a different turnout rate in presidential elections versus primary elections. And when we know that the turnout rate is lower, we also know who's more likely to turn out, who's more likely to vote. What? Those extreme, or at least political elites, more of the people that feel very passionate about what they're doing. So the voter turnout might be less. The voter turnout is less. It's more likely going to be the political active that are going to vote, and those tend to be more on the liberal conservative side. That may not be the main reason. There's probably a number of other reasons, including all of these. They can take credit for stuff. The members of Congress often do. We'll see there's a little bit of inconsistency with the American voter. And we'll study our national budget. We're going to spend a couple days on our budget here in a couple weeks just to get some basic terms and some things on there. But we hate wasteful spending. We're 17, probably closer to $18 trillion in debt right now. And as Americans, we're frustrated with those numbers. And we say that Congress should stop spending so much money. Or we blame it on the president, but really we should blame a lion's share on Congress, is that they should stop spending money. And I think most Americans agree with that statement. However, we like it when they spend money on us, meaning that if you're a farmer in South Dakota, that you like egg subsidies because it's good for you. Or if you're an ethanol producer in South Dakota, you like corn subsidies because it's good for you. Okay? If we live in South Dakota, we really want to keep Ellsworth open, even though it maybe would be financially smarter if we combine some Air Force, some Air Force or some airports, military airports, air bases. Okay, but we want to keep ours open. The Lewis and Clark pipeline, we want that water, and we want federal money for that water. So we say we want to spend money wisely, but we like when we have stuff. So think of this as a state. We may say as a school, you know what, we can't be wasteful in our spending, but we would really like if we had computers in this room, if we had a cart in this room that we could use. And we would really like if the heat was, more regulated, or we'd really like if these things, and if I say, hey, look at this, you got these carts to use, these computers, I got you those. I got you those. And then we can take, members of Congress can take credit to things that they bring home from Washington, and sometimes we call those earmarks and pork, and sometimes we may just call, hey, we kept the Air Force Base open. But we reward them with our votes because we like those things that they bring us, But they also have something that's known as franking privileges. And you never hear it called, well, it is called franking privileges, but outside of people who talk about government or really AP books, you never hear that term. But franking privileges is free mail. Okay, so if I'm a member of Congress and I have free mail, at least free mail that I can send to my constituents, which are the people in my state, or certainly the people in my district, and I can send those things to you, and they're not supposed to be for, hey, vote for me because, but they can be free promotional in a sense for, hey, this is a bill that we're out there, I'm working to get this particular piece of legislation passed. And what I can do is I can keep sending those things out closer to the election time if I need to, but anytime where I can keep my face and name there and you're getting some of this stuff. Okay, so that's an expense that the challengers don't get, or it's a perk that they don't get. Okay, so that franking privileges, and know this term franking, but it's just free mail. that members of Congress have. But it's a term that's used. That helps, too. Name recognition is a big thing. You know, if you know somebody and you don't know a whole lot about them, but the name rings a bell, you know they've been in Congress, you don't know, if you don't know their voting record, but you know they've been there, you have a better chance to vote for them. Why do you suppose people put signs up all the time? Think on election day or before elections that you have signs out with a name and bumper stickers. We don't learn anything of any value from any of that stuff. And yet they're spending their own campaign money on those things. They must work. It's kind of the idea of bandwagoning it. All these people have these signs up. I don't know if I should vote for this person or not, but you got a sign in your yard, and 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 you got a bumper sticker and so on. You guys must know what's going on. I guess I'll vote for this person, or at least I know who they are. Name recognition matters. How much? Hard to say, because I don't think most voters are going to say, hey, the only reason I voted for this person is because I knew who they were. But it may play a role in it. Money is a factor, and incumbents have more money to spend. Any other reasons that you can think of? Other reasons why the incumbents have a huge advantage? Huge statistical advantage. I think, Billy? Just better at running elections in general. I think you're probably right. I mean, look at Rick Perry right now. From the first time that he ran for president to it looks like he's going to now, he's polished some of the edges that made you think, I don't know if this guy's ready. So maybe just the fact you've run elections before, you kind of know how the game works, you know what you got to do, you know how you got to speak, you know what to do, you know where to visit. Unless there's some specific reason that's going to come up, right? The person took a bribe, or all of a sudden life goes really bad for you. You lose your job, the economy tanks in your state. Maybe you might consider it, but as long as things are going along smoothly, why not? Why make a change there? Maybe so.
You've already seen what they're doing where this university is probably completely
We'll go with this person because at least they know what's going on there. They've proven themselves competent there. We don't know if this next guy will be. I know I'm repeating what you say a little bit, but partially just so we can catch it on there. Yeah. But maybe they can get more done because of that. That's why I thought when South Dakota voted Tom Daschle out of office, that's when John Thune ended up beating Tom Daschle. And Thune had name recognition because he had been a member of the House. Then he lost to Johnson, so he was a year out, or 2 years out where he didn't do anything. But Tom Daschle was the Speaker of the House, or at the very least he was the House Minority Leader. I can't remember. He was Speaker of the House at one point. So he had some perks. He had not some perks, but he had some power. And we voted him out of office for somebody who would start from scratch, low person on a totem pole. But maybe the fact that Tom Daschle was a spokesperson for the Republican or the Democratic Party, essentially in the Senate. He wasn't Speaker of the House. He was the Senate Majority Leader. My bad. But maybe that he lost his appeal in a Republican state. But John Thune has moved up and now has some power positions there. So, but maybe we keep the people because we feel like they have power, and let's keep that power.
Pressler, right? He was kind of an insider.
That's at least when you run for election against somebody who's already holding office. That's usually what you say, is this person, hey, they don't know what's going on here. They've been out of our state for so long. You know, they live in Washington, D.C. They don't hardly come back. They're out of touch with our state. I wouldn't disagree with you at all. At least certainly if I'm running for election against somebody who's already an incumbent, you got to have some kind of argument against them, right? You know, and it may be they're corrupt and it may be they're not getting things done, but I don't think that's the true in our state. I don't think we've had any major corrupt members of Congress. You know, nothing stands out. We haven't had any scandals. You know, the losers haven't been, you know, fallen from grace kind of thing. So there's got to be some way to challenge them. Sometimes, and I don't know how often this is, and the book says it's probably not that big of a deal, but sometimes you can ride the wave of whatever change it is. And if you have a popular president, you know, you might ride the coattails in with him, you know, or her. You know, maybe if Hillary Clinton for the Democratic Party, maybe she becomes very popular and wins in a landslide, you know, assuming she gets the nomination. Maybe also we'll also vote in Democratic members of the House and Senate, and you can and do that. And sometimes there is a little of that. But I don't know if it's you're riding in the popularity of a new president as much as I think what we get sick of is we get frustrated with government. The American people get frustrated and they feel like nothing has changed. And what we do is we look at, well, who's in Congress? And nothing has changed. And we've had a Democratic president for 8 years, and we're no better off than we were before. If we feel that way as a people, we say, screw it, it's time for somebody else. And we choose, and then we go with somebody else. And I think there's some of that. It's we get frustrated, but I don't know if major quick change ever happens in America. And again, sometimes it's just they have enough. Even if we have an unpopular president, I don't think it's going to kill members of Congress. You may see that a little bit, but I don't know. I think they have individual support within their own district so much that they're not so tied to a president. Members of Congress like to do that. And I think a good example in our own state here is John Thune. When President Bush was very, very popular, and he was early on in his first years as president, especially after 9/11. I mean, his popularity was very high. They felt that he handled things really well then. There's a poster, a campaign poster of John Thune standing right beside George Bush. You know, that's a campaign poster saying, you know, here's a popular person I want to be with. You know, I'm like him. I'm working with him. By the end of President Bush's tenure as presidency, his popularity was much, much lower. And I remember, and I'm probably wrong on some of the details in here, but John Thune wasn't up for election, but he was giving advice to others. And I remember reading somewhere where he said, you know, don't be seen with the president. You know, that same poster he wouldn't have if he was running for election there because the popularity of the president was so low. So we like to link ourselves to, if I'm running against somebody and the president is very unpopular, I would try to link them to that president as much as possible. So the people feel like it's just the same person again. But again, I think there is, like I said, a little bit of cushion between them. You know, however you want to word this, I think sometimes we feel like Congress itself is bad. However, my congressperson is good. It must be everybody else. There's got to be some explanation why we keep voting the same people into office when our approval rating of what they do is so low. That makes no sense at all. It's like doing, you know, polls and find out, you know, how do people like your restaurant? And everybody who's filling out those cards say your restaurant sucks, and yet the same people keep coming back to your restaurant. Would you do that? If you go to a restaurant that has terrible service, the food is terrible, and the prices are overpriced, do you go back again? It makes no sense, right? I mean, we're intelligent people. You don't keep going back to a bad place. But for the same thing, we say Congress is bad. I mean, we don't like what they're doing. They're not getting anything done. We complain about them. Our approval rating is low, yet we keep voting those same people into office. And you might say, well, the American people are just idiots. But I don't think we are. I think there's a lot more reasons for why some of those things happen. We know some of this stuff, getting elected in Congress, but part of the reason is the districts, the House districts. And that That, I think, especially with the House reelection rate, is probably the biggest reason why members of the House can continue to win and win and win. Remember, districts are set up. Every state is going to have districts. I don't know if I have it somewhere on this PowerPoint. I'm going to jump ahead. Let's so you can see some things like some districts. I have Minnesota and a couple other states here. So this is Minnesota's 8 districts. District 8, District 7, and so on. And then around the Twin Cities is where we see there's more districts there. But they should be about the same size population-wise. It's some 700 and some thousand, but that number hasn't changed. We've had 435 members of the House since, I think, 1911. Okay, but obviously population has increased. And there's a couple things that we got to look at with that, reapportionment and so on. But so it used to be one member of the House represented, let's say, 400,000 people, and then it was, it keeps going up. Now it's around 750,000, somewhere in that range. Obviously, it can't be exact. 7 and 8 are not the exact same amount of people, but they should be relatively close to that same amount. The districts themselves sometimes are drawn in a way that favor one party more than the other. And actually not sometimes, oftentimes are. Who draws out these districts? The state legislature do. Okay, they're informed essentially, and we call this reapportionment, and we'll get to this, but they're informed about how many members they're going to have. And we realign that every 10 years. The Constitution says that we have to have a census every 10 years for the House of Representatives, because we apportion is proportional representation. So how many representatives a state gets is based on population. And as population shift over time, so should your representation in Congress. Right? So states gain seats and lose seats. So South Dakota, sometimes South Dakotans don't realize this, or maybe we don't pay attention to that, because we haven't. We did have 2 members of the House. I think we lost them in I'm going to say 80, but that might not be right. Might have been 76, somewhere in there. But California, not so much California, but Texas, New York, Florida, they're gaining quite a bit. New York is losing, but Florida's gaining, Texas gains always. But every time that you gain, every 10 years when they do that reapportionment, you have to redraw your districts within the state. So it's not, remember, members of the House don't represent the entire state unless you're an at-large state like South Dakota, where we only have 1. So if South Dakota would pick up a second member, if something happened with our population, we'd pick up a second member, you would have to draw the boundaries. And even though we do almost everything on the Missouri River in South Dakota, dividing left and right, you can't do that because it's got to be based on population. So you couldn't say District 1 is here and District 2 is here. You would have to draw it out. Let's say District 1 is here and District 2 is everywhere else in the state. It should be about the same in population. Probably not accurate, but just for today. But you got to realize that if you gain one, you got to redraw these districts. Or if you lose one, if we went from 3 districts down to 2 districts, then we got to start from scratch and redraw those 2 districts. And that's done by the state legislature. State legislature is political too, right? So if you can draw out the districts that would benefit a party so you have a better chance of your party getting elected, you would do that. And that's called gerrymandering. And it's not supposed to be legal, but without a doubt it happens. So part of it is malapportionment, which is not supposed to be legal either. Malapportionment is districts of unequal size. So one district of 1 million people, another district of 500,000 people would be a malapportioned district. That's not supposed to happen. And it doesn't happen as much. That's not as big of a problem as gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is drawing out a district in a way that benefits one party over another. Drawing out a district in a way that will benefit one party more than another. And the districts has to be a continuous district. So I can't say District 1 is here and a little chunk right here. They have to be continually touching. They can't be separated like this. And District 2 is everywhere else. But they can be drawn out in a way that you put more of one party in a district than another. If I'm a Republican and I'm going to draw out the districts, I'm going to try to get as many Republicans in different districts, or at least say the majority of Republicans in as many districts as I can. Now, I might have to give up one district and try to lump all the Democrats in one particular district and say, all right, we're going to lose that one. But we want to have a statistical advantage in every other district, or as many districts as we can. And if you have a statistical advantage based on party representation, and we know that the biggest factor in how people will vote is their party. The Republicans are going to vote Republican, and Democrats are going to vote Democrat. If we can have in here, and we have, I don't know, 25 people, so we have 15 Republicans in here and 10 Democrats, and we draw out this district to do that, we can be pretty safe to say that the Republicans are going to win every election within this classroom, right? So if you can draw out a district that gives your party an advantage, you have a best chance of winning elections. And we see a lot of that. We call these safe districts. Safe districts are ones that may or may not be drawn during gerrymandering, but a district that one party is so dominant within that district that they're almost always going to win. It comes from, it's called gerrymandering because I guess the first time it was supposed to look like a salamander, but it certainly occurs. Now, we have about 4 minutes, and I want to show you a couple things on gerrymandering, but I don't think we have the time to do it. But I think to understand truly why House districts are so safe, you got to understand how the districts are drawn up. And so we'll spend some time on that, along with apportionment and reapportionment. It's why the next House election, yeah, somewhat. I don't know if that's the answer on that.
Or how do they
That I don't know. There's some statistical things.
Right.
I'm not a math teacher, but there's got to be formulas. But it is why that we can look at the districts right now and say Republicans going to win, Democrats going to win, Democrats going to win, Republicans going to win. Some districts are not overwhelmingly Democrat or Republican. So there may be 35 districts in the next House election that are up for grabs. The rest of them we can predict right now who would win. They would certainly have an advantage. However, that's not always the case here. Dashiell was a member of the House for a while. Stephanie Herseth-Sadlin, who's a Democrat, was a House member. South Dakota, they certainly would have an advantage. And like Kristi Noem right now will probably be there for a long time because a Democrat would have to beat her out. And because she's already an incumbent, it would be difficult for her to lose.